In the vast cosmos where 1,000 species trade among the stars, there exists an unspoken truth. When something becomes too much trouble, you abandon it. The Zephyrians, masters of genetic engineering and creators of living weapons, followed this rule without question. They had crafted the perfect predator, a creature that could hunt in any environment, survive any climate, and strike fear into the hearts of their enemies. But when their creation became infected with something they couldn't understand, something that made their fur fall out and their strength fade away, they did what any civilized species would do. They left it to die. What the Zephyrians didn't know was that on a small blue planet called Earth, there lived a species that had spent thousands of years doing something the galaxy considered foolish, taking care of broken things. Humans had a strange habit of nursing wounded animals back to health, of fighting diseases that seemed impossible to cure, and of refusing to give up on creatures that others saw as lost causes. When cargo pilot Sarah Chun stumbled upon a dying alien beast in the abandoned sectors of Station Omega-7, she had no idea that her decision to help would challenge everything the galaxy thought it knew about strength, survival, and what it truly means to be civilized. The cargo bay of Station Omega-7 smelled like rust and forgotten dreams. Sarah Chun pulled her jacket tighter as she walked through the abandoned sections, her flashlight cutting through the darkness like a knife. The station had been a bustling trade hub once, before the Galactic Council decided to move all major operations to the newer facilities closer to the core worlds. Now it served as a dumping ground for things nobody wanted anymore. Sarah was here for salvage. Her small cargo ship needed parts, and her credit account needed numbers that didn't start with minus signs. What she found instead was something that would change her understanding of the universe forever. The sound came first, a low, painful whine that seemed to echo from the deepest corner of Bay 94. Sarah had heard wounded animals before. Growing up on the farming colonies of New Montana, she'd spent countless hours helping her veterinarian mother tend to everything from sick cattle to injured wild creatures. This sound was different, though. It carried intelligence and something that might have been dignity trying not to break. She followed the sound through a maze of stacked containers and discarded equipment. Her flashlight beam, finally, settled on a cage that looked like it had been built for something much larger than what was inside it. The creature within was unlike anything Sarah had ever seen, yet somehow familiar. It looked like a tiger if tigers could grow to the size of draft horses and had fur that shifted colors like oil on water. But this magnificent creature was clearly dying. Its once proud coat was patchy and dull, falling out in clumps that littered the floor of its prison. Open sores covered its skin, and its breathing came in labored gasps. The creature's eyes, though, those eyes held an intelligence that made Sarah's heart skip a beat. "Oh, you beautiful thing," she whispered, and the creature's ears perked up at the sound of her voice. "What did they do to you?" The cage bore markings in Zephyrian script. Sarah's translation implant kicked in, displaying the words in her mind. Biological weapon designation, Apex 7. Status, compromised. Disposal authorized. Disposal. They had left this incredible creature here to die like garbage. Sarah looked around the bay and found what she was looking for, a control panel for the environmental systems. The cage was equipped with a force field rather than physical bars, probably to contain something much more dangerous than the dying creature inside. It took her 20 minutes to hack through the security protocols, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface, while the creature watched her with those knowing eyes. When the force field finally dropped, Sarah expected the creature to try to escape or maybe attack. Instead, it simply looked at her and made a sound that could only be described as a question. "I'm going to help you," Sarah said, stepping slowly into the cage. "I don't know how yet, but I'm going to help you." The creature was even larger up close, easily weighing as much as a small vehicle. Its body was built for power and grace, with muscles that spoke of strength even in its weakened state. Sarah could see the intelligence in its movements as it carefully shifted position to let her examine its wounds without making any threatening gestures. "You understand me, don't you?" she asked, running her hand gently along the creature's neck. The fur was softer than she expected, and she could feel the rapid beating of its heart. "You know I'm trying to help." The creature made another soft sound and very carefully rested its massive head against Sarah's shoulder. The gesture was so trusting, so gentle from something that could have killed her with a single swipe of its paw, that Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. She spent the next hour examining the creature as best she could with her limited medical knowledge. The skin condition looked like some kind of parasitic infection, but unlike anything in her mother's veterinary databases. The sores were arranged in patterns that seemed almost too regular to be natural, and there was something odd about the way they seemed to pulse with a faint, sickly light. "I need to get you to my ship," Sarah said finally. "I have better medical equipment there, and we need to figure out what this is." Getting a creature the size of a small elephant onto her cargo ship presented obvious logistical challenges. Sarah spent another 2 hours rigging up a makeshift transport system using the station's cargo movers and anti-gravity platforms. Throughout it all, the creature remained patient and cooperative, as if it understood exactly what she was trying to do. The trip to her ship, Lucky Strike, took them through several public areas of the station. Sarah held her breath every time they passed other beings, expecting someone to recognize the creature or demand to know what she was doing. But the few traders and maintenance workers they encountered barely glanced at what looked like a shipment of medical supplies under a tarp. Once aboard Lucky Strike, Sarah set up a makeshift medical bay in her largest cargo hold. She'd inherited the ship from her uncle, a gruff old smuggler who believed in being prepared for anything. The medical equipment was military-grade and designed to treat a wide variety of species. As Sarah powered up the diagnostic scanners, she wondered what her uncle would have thought about her using his ship to rescue an abandoned alien weapon. The scanner results made no sense at first. The creature's basic physiology was straightforward enough: enhanced muscle density, redundant organ systems, a nervous system that showed signs of extensive genetic modification. But the parasites were like nothing in any database Sarah could access. They weren't really parasites at all, she realized after hours of analysis. They were some kind of artificially created organism designed to bond with their host at the cellular level. But instead of the clean integration that their creators had obviously intended, something had gone wrong. The organisms were attacking their host, treating the creature's enhanced physiology as a threat to be neutralized. Sarah ran simulation after simulation, trying to understand what she was looking at. The artificial parasites appear to be some kind of control mechanism designed to make the creature docile and manageable. But the creature's enhanced immune system was rejecting them violently, creating a cascade of infections and complications that would eventually prove fatal. "They built you to be a weapon," Sarah said to the creature as she reviewed her findings. "But then they tried to put a leash on you, and when that didn't work, they just threw you away." The creature had been watching her work with obvious interest, its head turning to follow her movements around the medical bay. Now it made a sound that was unmistakably agreement, followed by something that sounded remarkably like disgust. Sarah laughed despite herself. "You really do understand everything I'm saying, don't you?" Over the following days, Sarah threw herself into finding a treatment. She contacted every veterinary database she could access, reached out to medical professionals across human space, and even sent carefully worded inquiries to alien medical networks. Most of the responses she received were polite, but unhelpful. The artificial parasites were beyond anything most doctors had encountered. But humans had one advantage that many other species seemed to lack. They were incredibly stubborn when it came to giving up on a patient. Sarah's breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Martinez, an old friend of her mother's who worked at a research facility on Luna, suggested that she try treating the artificial parasites not as a medical condition, but as a cybersecurity problem. You said these things were designed to control the creature's behavior, Dr. Martinez had explained during their video call. What if they're not really parasites at all, but some kind of biological programming? Maybe you need to think like a hacker instead of doctor. The idea was crazy enough to work. Sarah spent another sleepless night analyzing the parasite's behavior patterns, looking for anything that resembled code or programming logic. What she found was elegant and terrifying. The artificial organisms were indeed a form of biological programming, designed to rewrite their host's neural pathways and enforce compliance with their creator's commands. But the creature's enhanced genetics had created an unexpected variable. Instead of accepting the new programming, its brain was generating what could only be described as error messages, flooding its system with contradictory signals that were slowly killing it. The solution, when Sarah finally found it, was surprisingly simple in concept and terrifyingly complex in execution. She needed to reprogram the parasites themselves, changing their base instructions from control and modify to integrate and protect. It took her another 3 days to work out the details. She had to create a custom virus that would infect the artificial parasites and rewrite their programming, essentially turning them from weapons into medicine. The margin for error was microscopic, get it wrong, and she could kill her patient instantly. Throughout her work, the creature remained patient and trusting. It seemed to understand that Sarah was fighting for its life, and it did everything it could to help. When she needed to take tissue samples, it held perfectly still. When she needed to run diagnostic scans, it positioned itself exactly where she needed it. On the 7th day, after finding the creature, Sarah was ready to attempt her treatment. "I won't lie to you," she said as she prepared the injection system. "This could go very wrong very quickly. But if we don't try, you're going to die anyway." The creature looked at her with those intelligent eyes and made a sound that Sarah had learned meant agreement and trust. Then it very deliberately rested its head on her shoulder again, the same gesture it had made when they first met. Sarah's hands were steady as she began the injection sequence. The custom virus would take several hours to spread through the creature's system and begin reprogramming the parasites. During that time, either the creature would begin to heal or Sarah's intervention would kill it. She settled in to wait, one hand resting on the creature's massive flank, feeling its heartbeat under her palm. Outside the viewports of her ship, the stars wheeled slowly through space, indifferent to the small drama playing out in the cargo hold of a human vessel. Sarah had no way of knowing that her actions were already being noticed by others. The Zephyrians had monitoring systems in place to track their discarded weapons, and her ship's activities around the abandoned creature had triggered alerts across their network. They were coming to reclaim their property, and they were not known for their tolerance of interference. But that confrontation lay in the future. For now, Sarah could only wait and hope that her crazy plan would work, that a stubborn human's refusal to give up on a lost cause might succeed where an advanced alien civilization's technology had failed. The creature's breathing was already beginning to sound easier, and the angry red color of its wounds was starting to fade. Sarah allowed herself a small smile as she felt the first stirrings of hope. Maybe her uncle had been right about being prepared for anything. She just hadn't expected anything to include playing veterinarian to an alien war beast with a cybersecurity problem. The real test would come in the hours ahead, as the reprogramming virus did its work. But for the first time since finding the creature, Sarah began to believe that her patient might actually survive. What she didn't know was that survival was only the beginning of their story. Sarah woke to the sound of purring. The deep, rumbling vibration filled the cargo hold like the engine of a perfectly tuned starship, and for a moment she forgot where she was. Then she opened her eyes and saw the creature watching her, its wounds visibly healed and its fur beginning to show the first hints of its natural luster. "Good morning to you too," Sarah said, stretching muscles that had cramped from sleeping on the deck beside her patient. The creature had insisted on her staying close during the night, becoming agitated whenever she tried to leave for her own quarters. The transformation was remarkable. Where yesterday there had been open sores and patchy, dull fur, now Sarah could see healthy skin and the beginning of what promised to be a magnificent coat. The creature's eyes were brighter, more alert, and when it moved there was a fluidity that spoke of returning strength. Sarah ran her diagnostic scanners again, hardly believing what she saw. The artificial parasites were still there, but they had been completely reprogrammed. Instead of attacking their host, they were now working to heal and enhance its natural abilities. Her crazy plan had actually worked. "We need to figure out what to call you," Sarah said as she prepared breakfast for both of them. She'd been feeding the creature a mixture of synthesized proteins that seemed to agree with its enhanced metabolism. "I can't keep thinking of you as the creature forever." The being made a series of sounds that definitely seemed like an attempt at communication. Sarah activated her translation software and had it analyze the vocalizations, but the results were inconclusive. Whatever language the creature knew wasn't in any database she could access. "How about Apex?" Sarah suggested, remembering the designation on the cage. "Or maybe something less military-sounding. Tiger? No, that doesn't fit you somehow." The creature tilted its massive head, considering. Then it made a specific sound, repeating it several times with obvious intent. "Keth." Sarah tried to reproduce the sound. "Is that what you want me to call you?" The creature, Keth, made an unmistakable sound of approval and bumped its head against Sarah's shoulder. The gesture was becoming their personal greeting, and Sarah found herself looking forward to it. Over the next few days, as Keth continued to recover, Sarah began to understand just how remarkable her patient really was. The creature was not just intelligent, it was brilliant. Keth learned to operate the ship's computer interface within hours, quickly figuring out how to access the entertainment databases and even attempting to communicate through text displays. "You were made to be more than just a weapon, weren't you?" Sarah asked as she watched Keth skillfully manipulate the holographic controls. "They created something amazing and then try to turn you into a tool." Keth's response was a complex series of sounds that conveyed frustration, sadness, and something that might have been gratitude. The creature was learning to understand human emotions as quickly as Sarah was learning to read its expressions. Their peaceful recovery period ended on the fourth day when Sarah's long-range sensors picked up incoming ships. 3 Zephyrian vessels, military configuration, approaching fast and with obvious hostile intent. "They're coming for you," Sarah said, her blood turning to ice as she read the tactical display. The Zephyrians must have been monitoring their abandoned weapons. Keth's reaction was immediate and startling. The creature's fur darkened to a deep, threatening black, and its eyes took on a predatory gleam that reminded Sarah exactly what kind of being she was harboring. But when Keth looked at her, the expression softened. Sarah's ship wasn't built for combat. Lucky Strike was a cargo hauler with minimal defenses and no weapon systems more sophisticated than point defense lasers meant for asteroid debris. Against 3 Zephyrian military vessels, she wouldn't last 5 minutes in a straight fight. But Sarah hadn't spent her childhood on frontier worlds without learning a few things about creative problem-solving. "Computer, open a channel to the approaching vessels," she ordered. The main screen flickered to life, showing 3 Zephyrian officers on the bridge of the lead ship. Their avian features were set in expressions of cold authority, and their translator-generated voices carried no warmth when they spoke. "Human vessel, you are harboring stolen Zephyrian military property. Prepare to be boarded for retrieval of said property." "I'm not harboring anything," Sarah replied calmly. "I found an abandoned creature dying in a cage on Station Omega 7. Since it had been marked for disposal, I assumed it was salvage." The lead Zephyrian's feathers ruffled in what Sarah recognized as irritation. "The creature is military property regardless of its condition. You will surrender it immediately or face the consequences." Sarah glanced at Keth, who was listening to the conversation with obvious understanding. The creature's expression had shifted to something that looked remarkably like disgust, mixed with determination. "I'm afraid I can't do that," Sarah said. The creature was dying when I found it, and I've spent considerable resources nursing it back to health. Under galactic salvage law, that makes it legally mine until my expenses are reimbursed. It was a desperate gambit, but Sarah was betting that the Zephyrian's obsession with legal precedent would give her at least a few minutes to think. The Zephyrian commander's feathers flattened against his skull, a sign of extreme anger. Human, you try our patience. The creature is a biological weapon created by our scientists. It has no rights under any law, and your claim of salvage is ridiculous. Actually, Sarah said, pulling up legal documents on her secondary display, galactic law is quite clear about the rights of enhanced sentient beings. Any creature demonstrating sapient-level intelligence is entitled to legal protection, regardless of its origins. This was where her gamble paid off. Keth had been watching the conversation with obvious intelligence and understanding. Now the creature moved to where it could be seen by the Zephyrian ship's cameras and did something that stunned everyone. Keth began to communicate. Using the ship's computer interface, Keth rapidly typed out a message in perfect Zephyrian script. I am Keth Ulnara, 7th of my batch, created in the genetics laboratories of the Third Hegemony. I claim refugee status under Article 847 of the Galactic Protection Protocols. I have been tortured by my creators through the implantation of parasitic control organisms and abandoned to die when their experiments failed. I request asylum with the Human Confederacy. The silence on the communication channel was deafening. Sarah stared at Keth with new understanding. You've been planning this, haven't you? You knew they would come, and you've been preparing your legal defense. Keth made a sound that was unmistakably affirmative, then typed another message. The Zephyrians created us to be intelligent enough to be effective weapons, but they did not consider that intelligence might lead to consciousness and free will. They learned their mistake too late. The lead Zephyrian finally found his voice. This is impossible. The creature is merely mimicking learned behaviors. It has no true consciousness or legal standing. Keth's response was swift and devastating. Commander Valtheris, you were present at my psychological evaluation on solar date 847.3. During that evaluation, I correctly identified 17 complex philosophical paradoxes and provided solutions that impressed even your evaluation team. I also composed original poetry in 3 different languages and demonstrated mathematical reasoning beyond your own capabilities. Your report concluded that Project Apex had succeeded beyond all expectations in creating truly intelligent beings. Are you now claiming your own report was falsified? Sarah watched the Zephyrian commander's feathers go completely white with shock. Keth had just quoted from classified military records and demonstrated not only perfect memory, but detailed knowledge of their legal system. Furthermore, Keth continued typing, I wish to present evidence of the war crimes committed by the Zephyrian military in the creation and treatment of my kind. Keth began uploading files to the communication channel. Sarah's computer translated them automatically, and what she read made her sick. Detailed records of genetic manipulation, forced conditioning, psychological torture designed to break will and enforce compliance. Dozens of beings like Keth, subjected to horrific experiments and discarded when they proved too intelligent to control effectively. The Zephyrian commander tried to cut the transmission, but it was too late. Keth had routed the upload through multiple galactic networks, ensuring that the information would reach news outlets, government officials, and legal advocates across known space. You cannot prove the authenticity of those files, the commander said, but his voice lacked conviction. Keth's final message was simple and devastating. Every genetic marker, every cellular modification, every scar on my body is proof of what you did to us. I am living evidence of your crimes, and under human protection, I intend to testify against you before the Galactic Council. Sarah felt a surge of admiration for her patient's courage and intelligence. Keth hadn't just been recovering from physical wounds. The creature had been preparing a complete legal and moral case against its creators. The The Zephyrian ships held position for several tense minutes. Sarah could imagine the frantic communications between the commanders and their superiors back home. They had come expecting to retrieve a piece of military equipment, and instead found themselves facing a refugee with legal rights, documented evidence of war crimes, and the protection of human law. Finally, the lead commander spoke again. This matter will be resolved through proper diplomatic channels. The Human Confederacy will be contacted regarding this situation. I look forward to it, Sarah replied. I'm sure they'll be very interested in your biological weapons program. The Zephyrian ships departed without further comment, but Sarah knew this was far from over. She had bought time, nothing more. We need to get to human space, she told Keth. And we need to get you to people who can help with your legal case. Keth nodded, a gesture the creature had learned from watching Sarah, and typed a new message. There are others like me still in Zephyrian facilities. If I am granted legal standing, I can testify to their existence and condition. But the Zephyrians will not let this go unchallenged. They will try to stop us before we reach safety. Sarah looked at her ship's navigation charts. The nearest human Confederacy world was 3 days away through neutral space. 3 days during which they would be vulnerable to interception by Zephyrian forces operating outside legal jurisdiction. Then, we'd better make sure we get there in one piece, Sarah said. Do you know anything about their military tactics? Because I'm going to need all the help I can get. Ket's expression shifted to something that might have been a smile if tigers could smile. The creature began typing rapidly, pulling up tactical displays and communication frequencies. Within minutes, Sarah found herself looking at detailed intelligence about Zephyrian military capabilities, ship designs, and operational procedures. You memorized all of this? Sarah asked in amazement. Keth made a sound that conveyed amusement. They designed us to be perfect weapons. They did not consider that a perfect weapon might eventually turn against its creators. As Sarah programmed their cores for human space, she realized that she was no longer just helping a wounded animal. She was harboring a refugee, a witness to war crimes, and potentially the key to liberating others of Keth's kind from Zephyrian control. But first, they had to survive the journey. Sarah checked her ship's defensive systems one more time and hoped that her uncle's old smuggling routes would be enough to get them safely home. Behind her, Keth was already working on their next moves, preparing legal documents and evidence files with the methodical precision of someone who had been planning this moment for a very long time. The hunt was about to begin, but for the first time, the prey was fighting back with intelligence, determination, and the backing of a species that specialized in protecting the underdog. The Zephyrians had created the perfect weapon. They just hadn't expected it to develop a conscience. The ambush came exactly where Keth had predicted it would. Sarah's hands flew over the controls as Lucky Strike shuddered under the impact of Zephyrian plasma cannon fire. The neutral zone between Zephyrian and human space was supposed to be protected by galactic law, but Sarah had learned that laws meant little when convenient to ignore. They're using unmarked ships, Sarah called out as she threw the vessel into an evasive spiral. No identification transponders, no military markings. If they kill us out here, they can claim it was pirates. Keth was strapped into a specially rigged acceleration couch that Sarah had jury-rigged from cargo restraints. The creature's enhanced physiology meant it could handle much higher G-forces than Sarah. But even Keth grunted as the ship pulled another violent maneuver to avoid incoming fire. There, Keth typed on the tactical display, highlighting a route through a nearby asteroid field. They will not expect you to use that approach. Their ship designs prioritize speed over maneuverability in close quarters. Sarah looked at the route Keth had mapped and felt her stomach drop. The asteroid field was a navigation nightmare. Chunks of rock spinning through space in chaotic patterns that would challenge even the best pilots. But Keth was right about one thing. The larger Zephyrian ships would have trouble following them through it. Hold on, Sarah said, throwing the ship into a steep dive toward the field. This is going to get rough. The next 20 minutes were the most terrifying of Sarah's life. She flew through gaps between asteroids that seemed barely wider than her ship, using every trick her uncle had taught her about flying in dangerous space. Behind them, the Zephyrian ships tried to follow, but were forced to break off as their larger vessels proved too unwieldy for the tight maneuvers required. When they finally emerged from the asteroid field, Sarah's hands were shaking, and her ship's hull bore several new scars from close encounters with floating rock. But they were alive, and they had gained precious distance from their pursuers. "We need to get word to the Human Confederacy," Sarah said, as she checked their position. "Let them know what's happening before the Zephyrians can spin their own version of events." Keth was already working on that problem. The creature had been composing messages while they fled, complete with attached evidence files and legal documentation. "I have prepared a comprehensive report for transmission to your government, your military command, and your news networks. The Zephyrians cannot suppress information once it reaches human space." Sarah set up the transmission array and watched as terabytes of data streamed toward human space. Somewhere in those files was proof of everything Keth had told her: the torture, the experiments, the creation of sentient weapons, and their abandonment when they proved too difficult to control. But transmitting the evidence was only the first step. They still had to reach human space alive, and Sarah could see on her sensors that the Zephyrian ships were trying to cut them off from the most direct route to safety. "They're hurting us," Sarah realized as she studied the tactical display, "forcing us toward the outer systems where they can intercept us without witnesses." Keth made a sound of agreement, then began typing. "But there's another option. The research station at Kepler 442. It is technically in neutral space, but it has strong ties to human institutions. If we can reach it, they cannot attack us without creating a diplomatic incident." Sarah checked the coordinates. The research station was a joint venture between several species, including humans, dedicated to studying the unique stellar phenomena in that system. It would mean going deeper in a neutral space rather than heading straight for safety, but it might be their best chance. "What do you know about that station?" Sarah asked as she altered course. Keth's expression grew thoughtful. "More than I should. The Zephyrians have been monitoring it because some of the research conducted there could be used to improve their biological weapons programs. I was being prepared for a potential infiltration mission before I was abandoned." Sarah felt a chill as she realized what Keth was telling her. "You were designed to infiltrate human facilities?" Among others, the Zephyrians believed that a creature capable of inspiring sympathy and trust would be ideal for intelligence gathering. They programmed us with enhanced empathy and social skills, intending to use those traits as weapons. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. The very qualities that had made Keth such an effective companion, its intelligence, its ability to inspire affection and trust, had been engineered by its creators as tools of espionage. But those same qualities had also given Keth the moral framework to reject its programming and seek freedom. "Their plan backfired spectacularly," Sarah observed. Keth made a sound that could only be described as laughter. "They created beings capable of understanding right and wrong, then ordered us to do evil. They should not have been surprised when we chose differently." The approach to Kepler 442 research station took them past some of the most spectacular scenery Sarah had ever witnessed. The station orbited a planet that served as a gravitational lens for studying a nearby pulsar, creating visual effects that painted space in brilliant colors. But Sarah barely had time to appreciate the view before her proximity alarms started screaming. The Zephyrian ships have been waiting for them. "It's a trap," Sarah said, stating the obvious as 3 vessels moved to intercept them. They knew we'd head for the station, but something was wrong with the tactical picture. The Zephyrian ships weren't moving to attack. They were holding position between Sarah's ship and the research station, blocking access but not firing. "Incoming transmission," Sarah's computer announced. This time it wasn't the military commander who appeared on screen, but an elderly Zephyrian wearing the elaborate robes of a high-ranking government official. "Human pilot, the official said, his translator giving his voice an oddly formal tone. I am Minister Velcorax of the Zephyrian Council. We are prepared to offer you significant compensation for the return of our property, along with guarantees of safe passage to any destination you choose. Sarah glanced at Keth, who was listening intently. The creature's expression had grown very still and very dangerous. I'm afraid that's not possible, Sarah replied. Keth has claimed refugee status, which means this is no longer a matter of property rights. The minister's feathers rippled in what Sarah had learned was a sign of barely controlled anger. The creature has no legal standing. It is a created being, designed to serve a specific purpose. You cannot grant rights to a tool, no matter how sophisticated. That's when Keth did something that surprised everyone. The creature began to speak, not through the computer interface, but with its own voice, producing sounds that Sarah's translation system rendered into perfect galactic standard. Minister Velcorax, Keth said, its voice carrying an authority that made everyone on the channel go silent. You speak of me as a tool, but I remember our last conversation. I remember the fear in your voice when you realized what you had created. You asked me what I wanted, and I told you I wanted freedom. You told me that was impossible, that I was designed to obey. But here I am, having chosen my own path despite your programming. Does this not prove that your philosophy is flawed? The minister's composure cracked visibly. You were malfunctioning. The parasites were causing aberrant behavior patterns. No, que triplaid calmly. The parasites were causing me to reject your control programming. But my desire for freedom, my ability to make moral choices, my capacity for growth and change, these things come from the consciousness you accidentally gave me when you made me intelligent enough to question my purpose. Sarah watched the conversation with growing amazement. Keth wasn't just defending its right to asylum. It was making a philosophical argument about the nature of consciousness and free will that was leaving the Zephyrian minister speechless. Furthermore, Keth continued, I wish to inform you that my brothers and sisters in your laboratories have been successfully contacted. The evidence I transmitted to human space included communication protocols that allowed human rights advocates to establish contact with the others of my kind still in Zephyrian custody. They have also claimed refugee status and are demanding release. The minister's feathers went completely white. Impossible. The communication systems in our facilities are secured. Secured against outside intrusion, yes. But not against communication from someone who knows the internal protocols. Did you forget that you designed us to be capable of complex problem-solving and creative thinking? Sarah's communication array lit up with incoming messages from human space. News of the Zephyrian biological weapons program was spreading across the galaxy at light speed, and human diplomatic ships were already en route to demand inspection of Zephyrian facilities. You have started something that cannot be stopped, Keth told the minister. My people will be free, one way or another. The only question is whether you will release them voluntarily or face the consequences of being exposed as a species that enslaves sentient beings. The minister tried several more times to negotiate, offering everything from vast sums of money to territorial concessions. But Keth's response never varied. Freedom for all of its kind, and prosecution of those responsible for their creation and mistreatment. Finally, the Zephyrian ships withdrew, their commanders apparently receiving new orders from their government. Sarah watched them disappear into hyperspace and felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It's not over, Keth said softly, but this battle is won. The research station welcomed them with open arms, eager to hear Keth's story and offer whatever protection they could provide. Within hours, the station's communication arrays were broadcasting Keth's testimony across the galaxy, complete with evidence that shocked even seasoned observers of galactic politics. Over the following days, Sarah watched as the situation evolved beyond anything she could have imagined. Human diplomatic ships arrived to escort Keth to safety, but by then, the creature had become something more than just a refugee. Keth had become a symbol of resistance against oppression and a living example of the potential for growth and change that existed in all sentient beings. The other creatures like Keth were freed within weeks, their release negotiated under intense pressure from the Galactic Council. Some chose to settle in human space, while others requested transport to worlds where they could live in peace. A few, like Keth, chose to become advocates for the rights of artificially created beings throughout the galaxy. Sarah found herself at the center of events she never could have imagined. The woman who had just wanted to salvage some spare parts had become a hero to rights advocates across known space. But the fame and attention made her uncomfortable. She preferred the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had done the right thing. "What will you do now?" Sarah asked Keth as they prepared to part ways at the human diplomatic station. Keth had accepted an invitation to address the Galactic Council about the rights of created beings, while Sarah was finally free to return to her normal life of hauling cargo across the galaxy. "I will speak for those who cannot speak for themselves," Keth replied, "and I will work to ensure that no being, created or born, is ever again treated as property to be used and discarded." Keth moved closer and performed their familiar greeting one last time, resting its massive head against Sarah's shoulder. But this time a gesture felt different. Not just trusting, but grateful. "You saved my life," Keth said softly. "But more than that, you saw me as a person when everyone else saw only a tool. That recognition gave me the strength to claim my own freedom." Sarah felt tears in her eyes as she hugged her friend goodbye. "You saved yourself. I just gave you the chance to heal." As Sarah watched Keth board the diplomatic vessel that would carry the creature to its new life, she reflected on the strange journey that had brought them together. She had found a dying animal in an abandoned cage and helped it recover. But what she had really done was recognize the personhood in a being that its creators had tried to deny. The Zephyrians had created Keth to be the perfect weapon, intelligent, adaptable, capable of inspiring trust and affection. But those same qualities had made Keth capable of growth, compassion, and moral reasoning. In their attempt to create a tool, the Zephyrians had accidentally created a person, and that person had chosen to be better than its creators ever imagined possible. Months later, Sarah would read reports of Keth's speech to the Galactic Council, where the creature's eloquent testimony led to the Universal Declaration of Rights for Artificial Beings. She would learn that Keth had established a foundation dedicated to helping other created beings find their place in galactic society. But Sarah's favorite news came from a small item buried in the back pages of a trade journal. A group of former Zephyrian biological weapons had settled on a quiet agricultural world where they were learning to farm and living peacefully among the local population. The article mentioned that they had established a small veterinary clinic offering their enhanced senses and intelligence in service of healing rather than harm. Sarah smiled as she read that report, thinking of a conversation she'd had with Keth about the irony of beings created to be weapons choosing instead to be healers. Humans had a saying that summed up the entire situation perfectly. One person's trash was another person's treasure. The Zephyrians had thrown away what they saw as defective weapons. But Sarah had found something far more valuable, proof that intelligence and compassion could overcome any programming, that consciousness was a gift that could never truly be controlled, and that sometimes the greatest acts of heroism came from simply choosing to help when others looked away. In the end, that might have been the most human thing of all, the stubborn refusal to give up on something worth saving, even when everyone else had written it off as hopeless. The galaxy was a little bit brighter because one human cargo pilot had decided that a dying creature deserved a chance to live, and because that creature had the courage to claim the freedom it deserved. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, former weapons were learning to heal, former tools were choosing their own purposes, and the meaning of consciousness was being redefined by beings who had every reason to hate their creators, but chose compassion instead. It was, Sarah thought, a pretty good ending to an impossible story.